Hi there. Thanks for joining for our Fulfilling Career Happy Life monthly live. I love these. I really look forward to them because it's an opportunity for me to sort of catch some of the big issues that have been coming up over the last couple weeks. That's how I plan these, is what are the themes that I'm seeing. It's just an opportunity for me to help a little bit. So I love them. So thanks for joining. Thanks for listening in later if that's how you're taking in this content. I'm Randi Roberts. I'm an executive and career life coach. I absolutely love helping people have a more fulfilling career. I was really lucky, have had two fulfilling careers now, and it's what I want for you. So thanks for being part of my world. Okay, so what are we going to focus on today? We're going to talk about overwhelm. We're going to talk about how leaders can recognize overwhelm in themselves, on their teams, what you can do as a leader to reframe it and really use it as you would any challenge as an opportunity for better performance and better productivity on your team. And why are we talking about overwhelm? Because I hear about it all the time. Some clients use different words for it, but the word overwhelm and the issue of overwhelm comes up so often. I mean, you as leaders, you're dealing with, micro and macro issues that are going on. It might be something that impacts your team, your company. It could be what's going on in the world. People are feeling overwhelmed. And your job is hard as the leader. You have to be reinforcing the big things, the vision, the direction of the company, how you're going to deliver, whatever it is that's expected of you, and maybe contribute up towards the mission of the company. You got to deliver in big ways, and you've got to deliver in small ways in terms of helping your team, you know, keep the effort moving, make sure that they're being productive, doing the things that you can do on a day-to-day basis. And in its purest sense, what we do as leaders, I mean, leadership is defined as our ability to influence. Sometimes it's influencing ourselves, it's our team, it's the business around us, it's customers, whatever that looks like. It really is our ability to influence. And leadership is as much about resilience as it is about the vision. I talked about the big and small, but really the resilience of dealing with the challenges, using them as fuel to keep going and do even better. Pick up when things are tough, and sometimes that's hard. It's one of the things that we're going to talk about, because times are tough for us too as leaders if we're feeling overwhelmed. And we all have things in other parts of our lives that are adding up to it, and you never know what that looks like for somebody else. Sometimes people will bring this stuff into the office, but sometimes people are dealing with family pressures, community pressures, financial pressures, whatever that might look like, that adds to this feeling of overwhelm for them. You never know what's on somebody else's plate. So overwhelm is a challenge for sure, but it's also a signal that might be, workloads are unmanageable, teams are stretched too thin, and it's a time when performance may be at risk. So it's really important not to ignore those signals, but to recognize them and reframe things for your team, because then you really can get back on track, and maybe even to higher levels of productivity, higher levels of collaboration on the team as you work through this, and growth for everybody. So that's what we're going to focus on today. All right, so diving into overwhelm, or whatever words you may use to describe that state for yourself. I'd be surprised if you never feel it, because I hear about it so frequently. So, where does it start? Like, something's off, but how do you know what it is? And so it's really a matter of tapping into what are the symptoms and what are the feelings that are involved, in terms of, it might feel like the swirl. It might feel like things are really heavy and you're just not sure how to move things forward. It might feel like a frozen feeling. But recognizing that overwhelm in yourself and in others is really where it starts. And what it might look like is, you might start to be aware of some changes in behavior in the workplace. It might be, increased irritability. We all have our days, but if you're seeing sort of a trend, It might be missed deadlines. Sometimes that's how it shows up. Decision fatigue is just taking people too long to get things, get the thought process even across the finish line, or you might see it on the team that things are really slowing down in terms of decision making. People may seem disengaged, or you may just see a decline in performance. Those may be signals that folks on the team are really overwhelmed. And what happens to us when we're feeling that overwhelm, our bodies recognize it as stress. Our nervous systems as mammals respond the same way to workplace stress as we do to, if we're being chased by a grizzly bear back in our caveman days. It's that fight or flight or freeze response that acts on us. Nervous system can't tell the difference between whether it's a perceived threat or it's an actual threat. So that is what happens to us. And so sometimes just recognizing that this is a normal physiological response can take some of the shame out of it. Like, this is just what we do. We're humans. So, if our reaction is that fight, which is, sort of getting combative, it's somebody else's fault, mixing it up a little bit, that's a signal. If it's the flight, people are calling in sick, might be another way. Not showing up for meetings, those may be things, ways of they're avoiding. And then the other sort of signal is the freeze in the, it could be harder time getting decisions made, hard time just even prioritizing and moving things forward. Those are all signals. And sometimes for some folks, overwhelm and anxiety can really show up, emotionally or physically even. It might feel like anxiety. It might feel like burnout. They might describe it as exhaustion, but it could also be some physical symptoms like headaches or disturbed sleep. So those, if you're hearing things, if you're hearing people talk about those things or you're noticing those things, it might be overwhelm. And so you need to think about how that manifests for you. And get to know the signs in your team, and hopefully, even identify some early warning signals so you can get out ahead of it, both for yourself and your team. A really important element of this is what I'll call the power of self-reflection. As a leader, you have to regularly check in with yourself and see how you're doing and put some practices in place to stay in the moment and stay focused on that, because that can really help break overwhelm, staying focused on the thing that's in front of you rather than imagining the thing that might be around the corner. So, I identify what that looks like for you and put some practices in place. I mean, what are your check-in practices? How do you deal with this for yourself? I know for me, it's getting out in nature. I mean, I love my work, but I am sitting at my desk all day, many days, meeting with people on Zoom or, moving work forward in some way. And if I'm starting to feel it, the best thing I can do is get some fresh air, get out in nature. Ideally, like, there's a really cool lake not far from my house that we walk there a lot, walking the dog. That really breaks the, sort of gives me a different scenery, literally, but also just sort of changes the subject, breaks your thought pattern, and gives you a fresh perspective. So know what that check-in process is, check-in practice that works for you. Put it in place and reinforce it. And one of the things that I would encourage is talk to your team about it, like narrate the process that you're going through. If you're feeling overwhelmed and you're taking action to address it, talk to your team about it, what you're feeling and what you're doing. It makes it okay for them. And it avoids them having to read your mind. They may sense some irritability or something going on with you. Maybe you're not as present as you used to be. If you're telling them what's going on for you, it's great, because then they're not having to guess. And in the absence of information, we're really good at making up powerful stories that are not always rooted in truth. Another thing that you can do with your team is create psychological safety. Now, that's kind of a buzzword now. You hear people talk about it's important in a culture. Of course it is, but what do we even mean? What we mean in general is people on the team feeling safe to voice their challenges, their questions, concerns without fear of being judged or that it's going to be held against them. If you've got that in place, people are much more likely to ask for whatever help they may need before things really fall apart. So, that's really what we're talking about is a safe space for people to talk about what's going on and what they need. I used to work for a big company that had what the CEO was really big on this. He talked a lot about a speak up culture. And really, he drove that from the top, and he talked to people at all levels of the organization, really wanted to know what was going on. Now, in a huge company, it's hard for that to really hit at every level. You have to keep working at it. But I really credit him for recognizing the importance of that and putting a stake in the ground. What are some of the things you can do to really set up a culture of psychological safety? Encourage that open dialogue. Do some regular check-ins if it's one-on-one or if it's with your whole team, sort of to gauge the workload, the stress levels, potential bottlenecks or obstacles before they really escalate. And I would really encourage you as the leader to bring curiosity to those engagements. It's easy for us to assume what's going on or how someone should handle it because maybe it was something that was right for us. By bringing curiosity, you really are much more open and can sort of meet them where they are. That does not mean that you always need to agree with them. I'm not suggesting that if someone, sometimes our team make requests that make a lot of sense, that are easy to fulfill, that are aligned with us delivering on our objectives. Great. Sometimes something comes up that you don't agree with, that you can't deliver on. You don't need to agree and make a commitment to something. But what I would say is seek to understand. This is where that curiosity comes in. If you're really understanding what it is they need or what it is they're asking for, you may be able to deliver it, or you may be able to find it a different way, or at least you'll know where they are and you can talk through why maybe that's just not going to happen. And if it's a little thing, you may be able to compensate for it. But if it's a big thing, could mean that they separate from the company. That might be exactly the right thing. Most of the time it doesn't go there. But what I want to encourage is for you to listen, ask questions. Doesn't mean you need to you need to agree with whatever it is that they're saying. Another thing we can do as leaders is to model that vulnerability, which can sometimes feel really scary. But if we are openly acknowledging our own challenges, talking about how we manage them, it really normalizes having the challenges, seeking support, sets a really powerful example. It might be simple things like if the way you manage your stress is you cut out in the middle of the day and you go, take a yoga class or go for a run or, whatever that is for you, talk to your team about it. Don't just disappear and be unavailable. If you think that's an important thing to do, let them know you're doing it. It makes it okay for them to do it. I have a lot of clients that feel really guilty if they, come in an hour late, leave an hour early, take an hour in the middle of the day, whatever that looks like, to do something that's beneficial for them. They are all making up that time. They just may be doing it in a creative way. And I guarantee you they're doing it in a more productive way because of whatever time they've invested in their own mental health, we'll call it. So let them know what's going on. If you're taking steps, share it. People cannot read your mind. And, thinking about really establishing that, I'm going to call it a help-seeking culture. You may have other words for it. It really reinforces that asking for help is actually a sign of strength. It's a sign of self-awareness. It's a sign of commitment to getting your objectives accomplished and delivering on your commitments. As a team, we could sit at our desk and struggle with something on our own, but if we talk it through with someone else, bring in other resources, and talking to someone else, you may find out about resources you weren't even aware of. We can accomplish more. We don't have to do it all ourselves. So really encouraging that help-seeking behavior is something else that you can do as a leader to really help break that overwhelm and move people forward productively. Another thing to think about is especially for yourself. If you're overwhelmed, I have this conversation a lot. How are you doing with delegation? Do you have the right team around you to delegate to? And how are you doing with actually turning work over? I've gone through that struggle myself. Um, and really what it does is it lightens your load, it empowers your team, it gives them an opportunity to stretch, but it also builds some trust and provides opportunities for growth for the team as a whole. You have to be really careful when you're delegating to someone who may be overwhelmed. If you're seeing that they're overwhelmed, it doesn't mean don't delegate. It just means do it really purposefully. So, if you're doing it with very clear expectations, it can actually help them break their overwhelm because it gets them into action. So that the clarity of expectations is really important. If somebody is overwhelmed, sometimes their powers of listening aren't at their peak. So really making sure you're being clear with expectations and having them, give me a read back on what you're taking from this and how you're moving forward. That can be really, really supportive. Something else that I suggest in that situation, if you're delegating to someone who's overwhelmed, or just they're overwhelmed in general, even if it's not a delegation situation, have the conversation about them. Like, here's this new thing. Let's talk about what that's replacing. Your plate's already full. So just throwing something else on there doesn't help that overwhelm and productivity. So have that discussion with them about, okay, this is job one right now. So what's the less important thing that's going to be that it's okay. We're aligned that that's not going to get done right now. That's a very powerful conversation to have. It makes it okay for them to not be able to get everything done. And like those of us that are motivated in our work and excited by our work, oftentimes like having more to do than we could do. Right? You get to change gears, you get to, keep things moving, get your fingers in a lot of different pots, but sometimes you need help with that, even those of us that really, thrive in it. Another thing that you as a leader can do is recognize our ability to influence our own mindset, because overwhelm is not just about the workload, it's about our perception of the workload. So sometimes, and I'm a big believer in this, you can choose your mindset, and with practice, it gets even easier. But if you're sort of steeped in this overwhelm and that's what you're aware of, you got to take a deep breath and think about what mindset will better serve you to unlock the logjam, if you will. So, thinking about that, like, what do I need to be different? What needs to be true here for me to move forward in a more productive way? Kind of once you get to an answer on that, you can make it happen for yourself. And oftentimes getting to that answer is much, much easier if you're talking it over with somebody else. So, just stream of consciousness sometimes. I just need you to listen to me for a moment can really help unlock some things. Okay, so there are some ideas for you. I want to review a couple of questions that I've been getting in regarding to leading an overwhelmed team and feeling it ourselves over the last couple of weeks. So I was talking about psychological safety with, this wasn't a client, it was a colleague. And they said, well, I've created psychological safety with my team, but they're still not speaking up. What am I supposed to do now? What am I supposed to do if they won't speak up? Okay, so you are suggesting you've decided that you've created psychological safety, but have you really? If nothing's changed, how do you know you've created psychological safety? So you got to check in. It doesn't exist just within yourself. It exists in between people in the culture. So the answers are also between people. So, ask them. What's going on? You could tell them if there are specific things that you have done to create this, or that you think you've done to create this. You can ask them if things have changed. You can ask the team how they're feeling in terms of their ability to speak up when they need help, that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be a big summit meeting. It's a couple questions, either one-on-one or on the team. Be open to the answer. If nothing's changed, you might not have created the psychological safety that you think you have. And then model the behavior. Tell them ways that you have asked for help. Ask somebody there for help. Tell a story of how asking for help or getting additional resources made a difference for you, a success story. Like, model that behavior and talk about it. And sometimes, like, even if you can tell that I tend to look inward first. If there's a problem, what have I done? What could I be doing differently? Sometimes the answer is we can make an adjustment. Sometimes the answer is I've done all the things and it's still not happening. And you got to recognize, like, you can only do you, they've got to do them. So, you can set the stage and it's really up to them whether they take advantage of it or not. Okay. Another question that I've gotten is, um, someone expressed, it wasn't really so much a question, but they expressed that the team's always talking about how overwhelmed they are and how busy and stressed they are. And the perception was that it's kind of feeding on itself. It's making it a bigger deal than it is. It's making it more present. And that could be, sometimes we kind of feed on each other. Like, there's a time for venting and then there's a time for doing something about it. So you could create a process on your team that works and it's repeatable. Call it out, let people know what you're sensing. Everyone's accountable for it. You ask them to take it on. And it could be a process as simple as, you can't do it all the time. It takes like 5 minutes in the way I've laid this out. You'll come up with your own. But if you're really sensing, that things are stuck, sometimes you got to go a little bit slow to go fast. So what the process could look like is, okay, I'm hearing a lot of, swirl going on or something stuck, you call it out. And then it could be a 2-minute situation download. What's going on here? What's going on with you if it's an individual person? And you limit it to 2 minutes. What's going on? So that can be a venting, that can be a status update, but it doesn't go on for too long. And then maybe you shift into like a 1-minute, define what would move things forward. Let's figure out what's the logjam and how we can unlock it. And then it might be another minute resource check of, what do we have that can help solve the problem? What do we need? Who else can pitch in? I just made that up, but you can figure out what process works for you to quickly get your team, get it out, get people to action, get people working together on it and move it forward. And you could give it a name on your team, whatever works for you guys. So give it a try, see what works for you, and just put it into practice. And anybody could call it out when it needs to be put into action. And talk to your team about it. Maybe they'll identify the process that works. But I do recommend putting some time on it because then it keeps it focused. If there's no time limit on it, that venting session can go on way too long. And the whole point is to get to a more productive place. So you got to make sure that you're going there. Another issue that has come up with clients recently is it's really hard for me to help my team with their overwhelm when I'm feeling so overwhelmed. Yeah, it is, because we're having to slog through our own stuff before we can help them sort of pick their heads up and see the light. So you gotta, physician heal thyself. You got to practice your check-ins. You got to put that into place. If it's, going for a walk and doing sort of a systems check on yourself, if it's, exercise, meditation, whatever it is for you, put it into practice and hold yourself accountable to it in the right ways. Build in some time with your team to check in on these things and really try and identify what are those early warning signals for your team so that you can head it off before it gets too bad. You do not have to solve this yourself. Sometimes our role as leader is to serve up the problem and come up with a group solution. So maybe you don't have to take it on yourself. Look, in general, overwhelm is really inevitable in this fast-paced world that we live in. If you're in a big corporation, there's a lot that's not in your control. I've been in that world, now running my own business where I'm in control of many things. I still get overwhelmed because it's a lot on, it's all on me, right? And my team that I've put together. But by recognizing those signs early and sort of shifting from suppressing it to actively engaging what's going on so that you can move past it, that can really make a difference and get people into action. And, foster a culture where asking for help is encouraged. Model the behavior yourself, ask for help yourself. That can make a huge difference. And those are some of the ways that we can turn these challenges with overwhelm into opportunities for greater performance, for productivity, for team cohesion. Those are all things that can move our business forward. And, again, it's not about us doing it alone. It's about creating the conditions where we can be successful and we could sustain it. So the more we embrace overwhelm, as with any discomfort, as a catalyst for growth, the stronger and more resilient we will be as leaders and our teams will become. So thank you so much for joining, for thinking about this stuff. If you have some thoughts, if you disagree with me, if you want to discuss it further, I would love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast where you get it, and look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks.